All right. Welcome back to the podcast, everyone. Allie, thank you so much for being here.
Thanks, George.
For those of you who haven't listened to our previous episode together, I think it was episode 6 I had Allie on before. Allie and I met at a retreat that her and Elena were putting on, Elena Brower. And as everybody I know who's met Allie and practiced with her has had this same experience that like once you practice and you study with Allie, it's like you're hooked. And so I had to invite you back during this time, especially just to like, maybe provide some insight that can help people feel more grounded amongst everything that's happening in our world right now. And so, what an interesting time we're living in. And one of the things, I wanted to start, I read a statistic yesterday, and then I wanted to relate it back to something I heard you say at the live-in I went on with you recently. And it said, one Stanford scientist estimated that China's coronavirus lockdown could have saved 77,000 lives by curbing emissions from factories and vehicles, nearly 10 times the number of deaths worldwide from the virus so far. So this reminds me of when you talked about being able to, you talked about you were in a car accident. Mm-hmm. And when you were in the car accident, the only thing, you got knocked unconscious, if I'm remembering this right. And the only thing that you could remember was, what mantra was it that you said it was?
The Maha Mrityunjaya, the Om Triambakam Yajamahe.
Yes. And so that was the only thing that you could remember when they were asking you, I'm assuming questions like, where are you? How old are you?
Your name, what state?
Yeah. Exactly. And so then you went to go print that off for us and for the group, so we could use that at your live-in. And the first thing that you read was invocation to ward off car accidents. I'm right? Yeah. And so, and then you went on to say, when we step out of the way, consciousness is so smart. And so I say all that to ask you, do you feel when you hear a quote like the one that I just read, that now we have been forced to kind of, as people, because of everything that's going on, step out of the way. And now the earth, in a way, is able to do what it needs to further heal itself?
Yeah, I don't know. First off, thanks for having me again. And secondly, a lot of the conversation is going to start with, I don't know. And it'll probably be that answer to every question, because that's just what's true. We've never been here before to our conscious recollection. And I'm also being very careful to not be reductive in the way that there's some people, and you happen to be one of them working in the way that you do, that there's some people that aren't having a forced stop and are working harder than ever and don't have a chance to step out of the way. They have to step in and on the front lines of, healthcare and grocery store and parenting, and we know the drill. And so for the people where this is true for that, then let's speak to that. I also just don't want to assume that's everybody's experience, because I think that's tone deaf in its way. But what I think is fascinating is that we're in such an unprecedented time of such uncertainty and such little control, which in truth is all we've ever been in. We just had a really strong illusion that we had certainty and control because we put so much faith in the mechanisms of structure and institution and role and habit and routine, and assuming this day will go the way that day went. And so I think we're in a great moment of honesty about the systems that we thought were robust or fragile, both external to us and internal. The places we thought we were so structurally sound, we're seeing have some fragility. And so I don't know, but I really deeply trust in balance and order, and that there will be beautiful things that come of such an extraordinarily hard moment for so many people and so many systems, and that it's never one thing. It's always the full experience. But right now, I think my experience and those people I'm speaking to and the clients I'm speaking to, the greatest confusion is that so few times in life where something is everything. It's both terrible and wonderful. It's both treacherous and faith-filled. It's like the container of what everything is that we can hold has become more substantial. I don't know if you're experiencing that too over there. In a moment, I'll go through terror and excitement in the exact same second.
Oh, for sure. And, I don't know either, but I fall into the same line of thinking as you, where I believe that something as awful as this has been for so many people, and there are people on the front lines, and we don't want to ignore that. I do believe that like something greater is going to come of this.
I do too.
And I trust that, but I don't know.
I believe that deeply. I have faith in that because I think that's the way evolution tends to go in favor of healing and wholeness and balance. And I also have a lot of faith that even though we might be in unprecedented times, something inside of us really knows what to do, knows how to show up, knows that it was born for this, is prepared for this. There's, to your first quote, when we step out of the way, something inside of us definitely knows how to help and heal and mend and grieve and sit. And something inside of us knows for sure what to do right now.
Yeah. And I can only trust, because I believe that too, that something inside of me knows what to do right now, that if that's true, and that is true for me, that something greater will come of this because of that.
Yeah.
And so, I was listening back today to the talks that, the lectures that were given at the Live-In that I just attended of yours. And you say this a lot. I've heard you say it before, but you say energy cannot be created or destroyed. It must change form. And so I was thinking about that today because it reminded me a lot of my sobriety. I remember when I got sober, or not when I got sober, when I would try to get sober, I would wake up, after things would get bad, and I'd try to create something new for myself, or I would try to destroy the energy of the old me by moving somewhere else or doing something similar. And so instead of what I did this time, which was change the form of my energy. And so I wanted to have you talk to us about that.
Yeah. So when we are stuck, there's this amazing website called the asknature.org. It's put out by the biomimicry people. And the biomimicry people are amazing.
Can you say it again?
Yeah, asknature.org. And what's so beautiful about the line of work that is biomimicry is it's scientists that go into all the fields of nature, into the ocean, into the sky, and into the land and the trees and the plants. And when there's a problem to solve, like how do we create more surfaces in hospitals that are sanitary, or how do we create more breakthrough in hard times? What they've done is they've cataloged an extraordinary amount of things that are naturally occurring in nature. There are some seeds in some pods that only come out under high combustion of a forest fire. And you'll never see these plants unless they've been through a fire. And so you can go onto the site and it'll be like, what's the best way to create turbine energy? And it'll give you the way that the fish do it in the sea when they're starting to collect, their own food sources. And why I bring this up is I think it's so important when we don't know what to do or where to go, to change our patterns and to find certainty in uncertain times and to add structure when there's instability, is to go back to the place that's billions of years old that knows how to adapt. And that, is nature. And so with the first law of thermodynamics and physics, that energy can neither be created nor destroyed, it has to change form. We know that, when you're speaking about getting sober, you couldn't just change your patterns. You had to really go and unearth the energy that was feeding them. And then with your attention and your healing and your love and your compassion and your presence and your change of course, you could really change that energy in a new way. You couldn't just turn your head. Turning your head doesn't make something go away, And so with this moment now, when we're looking at what do we do when, it's really important to isolate that root place of pain inside of ourself or the collective, so that you can go and solve for the right problem, and then look to nature, look to what's old, look to what's time tested, to see what are the solutions that help break through, that help transform, that help transmute. And that's why the spiritual teachings are so helpful, because there's an infinite number of them. how we get discipline, how we get virtue, how we serve, how we get kind, how we get still, how we pray. All of those things are answers to how do we change an energy when we just keep getting stuck in a habitual or addictive grip.
Yeah. And that's my experience. It's really those like old teachings that enabled me to change, have the energy that was me change form.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
And so, again, going back to some of the things that we talked about while I was at the Live-In with you recently, we were discussing the Upanishads. There was a quote that said, whenever we are in conflict or contemplation, we sit near the teachings. And so how important is it right now to have teachings to sit near? And so the other part of that question is because this is also what came up for me when I thought about that, is how important is it for us as teachers to be sharing our teachings now for others to be able to sit near?
Your questions are always so beautiful and thought-provoking. And, I think it's important now for everybody to sit close to something that is life-sustaining and good. And that could be your religion and your faith. It could be your family or nature. Sitting close to what's good means that, when it's cold at night, you go towards the fire, and your body knows when you're too close and it's too hot, or you're too far and you're too cold. And so if you're getting caught in panic or anxiety or terror for the future or overwhelm or stuck in a bunch of things that you can't control, you're either sitting too close to the fire or too far away from it. And so let your body regulate that metaphorical temperature of where does it just feel good and life-sustaining and nourishing. And whether, your teachings are in any faith across the board, sitting close to what's good is always going to be what's occurring in the present. What can I do? What can I control inside of me? How can I let go of what I cannot? And where do I need to ask for support or help? And so that some people, when they listen to this, you might be having to purse out your day in moments. I can get through this moment. I can get through this moment. And other people, you're dealing with large stretches of time of just your own self and your own boredom and your own distraction, your own addiction. And that's a different thing we can talk about. To your second question of is it important for teachers to teach? I think it's important for everybody to do whatever they feel helps the most. And if that's something that's helped you, it will most likely help another. I think more important than teachers teaching is all of us being good students to this moment. And to be a good student to this moment asks good, curious questions. Who can I become in this moment? How do I want to place myself in this moment? Who do I want to surround myself with in this moment? Where do we want to go from here? How can I, those who, where, when, whys that make a really good, curious student. The teachings will come. I think we see a friend of mine, John Morrow, I was talking to him earlier. He's a beautiful artist and author. And he was saying, it's so confusing to him how whenever something changes, he notices how he now relates to the marketplace. And I really relate to that. Like, okay, quick, how do I relate to the marketplace? Who needs to hear what? And that takes me out of just like, how do I serve and what makes sense? Like I go into my own place of panic and fear of the future. And I love that of like not relating ourselves in place of the marketplace or social media, but what can I do in this moment? What can I control? Who can I help? Who can I serve? And those questions to be just good students. And then if you've got excess, give. If you've got excess, give, because there's a lot of people in need right now.
Yeah, so much came up for me there, but a lot of what you said reminded me of, just looking to see like, maybe I'm not a teacher, but what is it that life affords me the opportunity to give right now?
Perfectly said.
And jumping around a little bit, I wanted to talk to you about a time like this. Again, another tool that might be able to serve and everything that's going on. Something that had a big impact on me that I learned about from you was Byron Katie and the work. And so I wanted you to just talk to us about Byron Katie and the work and, what kind of effect that has had on you. How did you discover it? And, where would you suggest, like if, what you say inspires somebody to find out more about Byron Katie and her work, that they go to do that?
Yeah. So the best thing to do, I think as soon as you find somebody that really resonates with your mind and your heart, and I'm sure you and all of your listeners have that inside of music and art and spirituality, and practice somebody that really speaks to or resonates with their truth inside, the way her teachings and her way have with me. And so the best thing to do is go hear it from her own mouth at thework.com, and, YouTube everything Byron Katie, where in such an elegant, simple, and non-dogmatic way, she teaches an incredibly powerful method of questioning stressful thoughts and beliefs and using the mind to turn upon itself these 4 simple questions. And I won't speak to it because those are her teachings. I'll speak to it of my experience with it. And, I just highly recommend go to thework.com, go YouTube everything Byron Katie if it speaks to you. But, I had been introduced to her probably 10 or 12 years ago, and had been with her in person. But, when I was at the school most recently in November, what it really showed me, and I've got a 20-year practice of really inquiring into the mind with different therapeutic and shamanic and plant medicine and meditation and yogic techniques. But what really this last time, 20 years later in my own practice, is what I saw with the school in the particular way that she teaches, and is so spontaneous and funny and fast and loving and compassionate, is that her work of questioning the mind, the inquiry of the mind, what I'd been doing was really going for insight, trying to get perspective. Like, I know why I do what I do, and I know why that happened. And I was trying to get almost more right or more smart. Okay, sorry. So we got cut off. So I'll loop back into what I think is so relevant for right now, is that in this point of trying to get insight, like really fast perspective of, I know what's happening and I know what to do and I know why things are happening and I know why whatever it is, we miss that chance of just sitting a moment longer in the unknowing, but the let me just see. And so it's a little slower, it's a little quieter, it's a little more provocative and confrontational to not be the one that knows. But what really has helped me so much is moving from insight to inquiry, where I don't have to be the one that knows. I have to be willing, humble, and available enough to ask, where's that coming from? Is that true? What happens when I believe that? Is that stressful thought true? And so her work really works with whatever you're thinking or believing that's a stressful thing is really just all alive inside of your mind and is open to being questioned, then the inner intelligence will come and really support you with it. But again, she's as awake as they come, and her mind is as beautiful and elegant as they come, in my opinion. So go look for yourself. But the most helpful thing right now is having any practice that lets you take a stressful thought or belief and do something with it that doesn't just have you, again, turning your head away from it. Like when a child is having a tantrum in a store, it doesn't work just to pretend it's not happening. You got to get down on its level and see what it needs, see what happens when it's dialogued with. And so hers and so many others, it's cognitive behavioral therapy really works strongly in a similar way as she does, and so many other spiritual teachings. But to me, she's the queen.
Yeah, I mean, you suggested the first time I met you, her book, A Mind at Home with Itself, which is, if you are looking to explore more about her, a book that, I would recommend in general everyone read. But everything you just said, and actually what we talked about prior to that, really reminds me of, once I heard somebody say, like, if you want better answers, ask better questions.
I love that.
And, it's like you said, that self inquiry that leads us to be able to have a new experience of life unfold for us.
And if we stay close to that right now, just like, let me be curious about this moment. Let me be curious about this time. Let's see what happens.
Yeah. And for me, it's like, too, I always go back to, like, I remember early on in my journey in sobriety, learning that, like, this concept of nothing new coming from the known, and like being in that space of the unknown is where, like, insight and creativity and new things are able to arise.
Mm-hmm.
So we wanted to take a sec to thank you because, right now, I'm not sure if you know this, but in New Hampshire, there's no 12-step meetings going on because of everything that's happening right now. And there's other areas right now where people can't get to recovery meetings. And, there are Zoom meetings, as you know, I'm hosting some myself, but God forbid, Zoom stops working and our internet goes up. Today, I have the resources to go within to get filled up. And I think that right now, especially, it's so important that as a collective, we learn how to redirect our search for peace from the outside in. Mm-hmm. And so I was just wondering, I've heard you talk about referencing what's right for you first through source before another, how important that is for us to be able to fill ourselves up first from the inside out.
Yeah. And what I'm seeing both with people I'm in counsel to and other people I'm in communication with is, for some people that are having a chance to quarantine or isolate, and this is the first time in a while they've stopped being on this habitual cycle of work and family and relationship or whatnot. We're not just moving into this totally delightful time of getting home workouts and home practices and all this time to do the projects you didn't have time to do. What's happening is everything that was unprocessed and avoided and used like addiction and hyper busy productivity methods, all that stuff, when it stops, all those patterns that we've so, grown accustomed to avoiding and distracting and numbing and moving away from start to come right to the surface. And so it's a really provocative and confrontational time for a lot of people where they don't have the similar ways that they would normally just avoid or distract. And so having some tools that help people deal with what they feel is super important if they haven't built a practice of really going into a place of stillness or silence or fullness in their mind, in their heart, or in their faith. And so there are amazing teachings and in accompaniment with this podcast, maybe we'll give out some resources to how to work with dysfunctional patterns or addictive patterns that are coming up or abusive patterns that are coming up where somebody can't just go to work and vent or go to the gym and let off some steam. And so we're seeing it come up in the family unit or come up inside of oneself because it's not that it wasn't always there. We just had amazing ways of avoiding it. And now it's this reckoning. It's again, this great honest moment of, wow, I was really good at staying sober when I wasn't in a constant place of being confronted with my vice. It was a really, healthy relationship with my partner when I only saw them 2 hours a week. And now with this, the more time you spend with anything, the more information you're going to get. And so if people haven't spent a lot of time in stillness and isolation by themselves, then it's going to be a very confronting time. And so yes, hopefully somebody can go to a source within that's a full place. But if somebody hasn't built those resources yet, then some nice prompt questions would be when you're really stuck or really scared or really anxious or really wanting the outer world to give you stability. Ask good questions. What would love do? What do I really believe in or have faith in that can hold my little beliefs of this isn't working out for me and we're not going to be okay? Going to a place of, even inner nature of how everything in nature will adapt and figure itself out. And our body and our neural network of our minds, it's intimately a part of that. The personality feels separate from it, but something in you is already a part of the nature that always knows how to adapt and regenerate and burn and create. And so if you haven't built something that looks like a relationship to source that will fill you, there are other ways to start that process now.
Well, something I always appreciate about you too is you try to speak in a way where anybody can access the teaching or what it is that you're sharing with us. And, what you were saying reminded me of how in the beginning of Light Walking's book, Blissmore, he has a quote that says, all of man's problems stem from his inability to sit alone in a room quietly. It's I can't remember the guy. It's maybe his name is Blaise. I don't want to screw it up. Blaise Pascal or.
Oh, Blaise. Yeah, it's Blaise, Blaise Pascal. Yeah.
I mean, that was my experience when I got sober. It's my problem was never getting sober. It was staying sober. And I couldn't stay sober because when I put down the drugs and alcohol, all that stuff that I'd been addicting to avoid came up for me. And so I can understand that what you're saying right now is like we've almost been forced now to look at this stuff because we've all been forced to stop.
If one has the courage to look. And we also have an incredible number of ways of just getting caught in social media and Netflix that let us do the same thing. And so I'm encouraging myself to make this a different moment so that people don't die in vain. And what I mean by that is like, if we're really going to go through a hard time, let's do our very best to become somebody different of virtue in the process of it. And so that might even be just limiting a little bit of time in panic and in future, limiting time in Netflix, limiting time in porn, limiting time in self-abuse or self-criticism and too much eating, whatever is the way you get away from the pain of being in human form, of, having stories that have broken your heart in your own life, or being in a panicked future, and being able to just sit still, befriend them, be with them, question them, feel them, and move through a process of that. Even if it's 5 minutes a day, then we'll do our own little cleanup as we go. Something
that our friend Louis was telling me about was he's doing Elena's Simplify course. And he said that in the first week to like make this practical and maybe offer value to somebody who's listening to see like what are these patterns so they could start to become a more conscious choice maker around these things. Is he said like in the first week of Simplify, she had you write down everything you did for like a week all day. And then like you got to see like, oh, I was on Instagram looking at freaking, for the last, 3 hours. And it's one thing to do that for like 5 minutes, or like for me, like I noticed on, because once I started meditating and enlarging my spiritual life after I got sober, I started to become aware after a while of all those behaviors I was engaging in that were no longer serving me. First, it was the way that I ate, then it was porn. But one of the other ones that I noticed was would distract and I would numb with sports videos on YouTube. Like I would sit there and watch like a video of, or like football highlights for 3 hours because I didn't want to feel the discomfort that was showing up for me. And so he was saying that Elena was saying like, make a list of what you do each day. And then like, if you see like, hey, look, I've been watching sports for 3 hours a day when uncomfortable things come up for me. It's not that now that you become more aware of it, you're never going to do that again. But the difference is now you might become more aware 5 minutes into it and be able to stop yourself at 5 minutes versus 3 hours. Yeah. Well, and that's such a beautiful exercise that she offers, because when people are feeling so out of control of how long is this going to last, and is my job going to be there in the future, and what's going to happen, when you can get control over anything that you actually have agency over, take it. And so that is your time. And there's something that, I've often recommended, especially in our program Upwards, is there's a thing, you can do that's called an attention budget. And it's the same way if you were budgeting your money. And at the end of the month, you realize like, no wonder I can't eat. I'm spending all my money on, drugs and girls. And when you do an attention budget and you say, gosh, no wonder I can't sleep. And no wonder I'm not feeling good. No wonder I can't lose weight. I'm spending all my attention in places that I know don't move my body or help my mind or build a new future or help anybody else. And so I love that exercise of getting really like real, raw and gritty with how are we spending time. And if you're afraid of losing control, get in control of the thing you can, the way you spend your time and the things you think and believe. And if you're super unstable right now, get structure. So plan out your day, stick to it, create a commitment to it. And if you're wanting all of these outer forces to stick to what they say and follow through on their promises, become that force. And that's going to be how it builds this like really nice infrastructure from the ground up of getting agency back, And I think it's important right now to see where we're distracting and avoiding and numbing, and to be really gentle with ourselves. You might it's not bad to watch YouTube videos of sports, but when you lose choice, well, I didn't mean to be doing that, then it's starting to get tricky. And the thing is I totally understand it wasn't bad, but there were things like writing my book that I've been working on, that sets my soul on fire probably more than anything else I spent my time doing that I could have been doing instead of that. Nice. And so it's just, for me, it was about that wasn't really what I wanted to be doing. Yeah. And
that's so true.
I like how you talked about like taking back control of the things right now we can control, because things during a time like this can feel so out of control. And so it's like we need to be able to try to control the things that we can sometimes when we're feeling really ungrounded.
Totally.
And
totally.
I think that's like, for me, having that like routine with waking up every morning and doing my morning Vedic meditation practice and for 20 minutes. And then again later in the evening, like having that structure, like brings me back to that place where I'm experiencing that, field of quiet underneath all my mind's activity. And so I get to steep my day in that stillness and silence right now. That is helping me feel more grounded throughout my day. And then, life on life's terms happens 4 or 5 hours later. It might not even feel like you've meditated, but you get to again come back there in the late afternoon or early evening.
Yeah, it's so well said that there's touch points of sanity, Yeah.
And so, something else I heard you mention before is that things cannot be separated from the one that created it. It can get far from source, but like water that gets far from its source that gets gunked up, it's still water. So my question around this was like, is this why we suffer? Because we forget the truth of who we are?
I think it's one of the great reasons. I think it's one of the great reasons, and that those moments in your life and my life and whomever's listening's lives that have reminded us that there's like a humanity that's good, and there's a place inside that's pure and truthful and loving, compassionate. Just touching those for moments, just mere moments, stops that separation, that longing to like feel like we're a part of something good. And, I've been thinking about that a lot of, when we go more into the esoteric and the mythical teachings of non-duality, where things cannot be separated from the source that created them. So if something, makes everything, then everything inside of its creation is built of it. A child will always have elements of its mother, father in it. We will always have elements of the stars in us. We'll always have elements of God consciousness in us. And so there's something inside of us that knows how to meet this moment. And there's something inside of us that can talk to by way of that old language of prayer, something about, these systems that are broken, even this virus, like we can talk to what's good inside of it, because everything is everything. And when we speak about source or God or the divine or spirit or whatever you call it, the other name for it is all that is. And all that is inclusive of everything and exclusive of nothing. So it's inclusive of this moment. So all that is also built with its intelligence and its love and its evolution into this somewhere. But we have to find it. And that's each of us on our own little track or treasure hunt or scavenger hunt for the Holy Grail, however you want to call it. But inside of it lives a place that, might be very far from source. It might be hard to see. But something in there, it's there. It always is.
Yeah. You said there's always a part of us that's God conscious. And do you feel like, because this is like my experience, like when I'm closer to that part of myself, reality is much different than when I'm further away?
In my experience.
When you think about that, when we think about meditation, I'd love to get your perspective on meditation being a way to let go of the ego's labels and returning home to the essence of who we truthfully are.
The most beautiful thing about that space of meditation, resting awareness and presence, the not know mind, the allowing mind, the let me see mind, the most beautiful thing about the meditation mind is its constant willingness to be in the actual and only moment that's ever occurring. Because as soon as we leave it and we go into a past that we can't control, that's filled with regret, shame, or blame, or we go into a future that we can't know, that's filled with terror and anxiety, then that ability for the meditated mind to come back to the only thing that's actually occurring, that it can tend to, and it can have choice in, and it can respond to, and it can soften into, and it can surrender into. There's a place that just merges all the place where the mind loves to make up a problem. And it doesn't mean there's not a lot of problems, but the willingness to just be in the actual moment and ask, is there anything I need to tend to now? Is there anything I need to tend to now? It really takes the problems and makes them so bite-sized and manageable and non-reactive. And so a mind that has constantly entrained itself to come into that allowing, not knowing, surrendering, let me see, witness space, is a mind that's going to be more adaptive for the times that come. Because many of us all feel that ride's just getting going.
So, yeah, let's talk about that. The ride's just getting going. So you're out in Mexico right now, right?
I'm in New Mexico.
New Mexico. Yeah. Nice. And so where are you guys staying out there?
I'm with my best friend and her father and his girlfriend on a big piece of land just north of Santa Fe. So we're pretty close to nature and the such.
Yeah. And that's really where I was hoping to, take this conversation next, is like, how important is it for you? I know it is for me, and most likely I feel like you probably would feel that it is important for us all to be in touch with nature right now. Like, I know we're supposed to be practicing social distancing, but for me, it's like right now I'm having this strong pull toward nature, and just like the homeostasis that can create for us, in the shifting of whatever's out of balance back in the direction of balance right now.
Totally. When there's moments of crisis or change or fast upset, and you see what you're pulled to, the people you're pulled to, the space you're pulled to, you'll see what you really value. And there's a part of us, all people are making a pull back to nature, and that's because it's sane, it's life sustaining. It's the only thing that we're here, I think, to really protect and uphold, so that we can assess our values of who's supporting who. As humans make themselves the kings of this chain. But those times when we really see things destabilize and things get scary and things get wild, when you see what is your natural proclivity of where you want to be and the people you want to be with and who you want to be, you're going to find a lot of answers to what to do. And so times of feeling lost, I don't know what to do and I don't know where to go, these are amazing times to really know yourself. And we need to go back to nature. We need to go to the place that asks nothing of us and provides everything for us, so that we fall back in love with it again. Because when we fall in love with something, we're inclined to protect it. And that place where, like, of course we want to be in nature. Of course you want feet on ground and the air to smell good and the water to be there, because it's who we are. It's what's truth. It's as close to source as we will get. And if somebody doesn't have a relationship to a faith-filled God, to me, all you need is this great relationship to a tree and an animal and a stream, to see that God is built in everything that's untouched and wild.
Yeah, that's what I love about, and that's one of the reasons I feel like different 12-step groups have been able to be around as long as they have, is because they don't tell you what to believe. They just suggest that you believe in a power greater than that most individual self, your ego. And I couldn't agree more. It's that being out in nature and connecting with our earth, and just, seeing the power that is nature, that is greater than ourself, and just allowing ourselves to believe in that.
Totally. Just that. Believe in nothing more than that.
Yeah. And that's enough. And that alone, and it reminds me so much of my experience when I got sober. I may have even talked to you. Yeah, I think I talked about this on our last podcast episode together. But whenever I would get sober, because I knew, left to my own devices, my most individual self, my ego, it didn't carry with it enough power to keep me away from that drink or drug. But I knew I would. And even though I knew that I needed to connect with something more universal, like my soul or my spirit, I had no idea how to go about that. And so I would try to figure out the inner workings of what I sometimes say, the inner workings of God's mind. But another thing I heard you say is, I think it may have been a quote from the Upanishads, was that which the mind cannot comprehend, but by which the mind comprehends, know that.
Yeah, totally.
And totally. Yeah, for me, I know that power, which is greater than myself, it's almost impossible for any person to fully comprehend or define that power. But I knew I needed to connect with something, but because it was too hard for me to comprehend or define, I was trying to, and then I'd find myself feeling restless, irritable, and discontent over not being able to know that power enough to be able to hold on to it. And so then eventually that discontentment that would leave me feeling would and cause me to then do the only thing I knew to change my state, which was to use again. And so this time when I got sober, I didn't worry so much about what that power was. Instead, I worried about what would keep me connected to it. And when I just worried about making sure that I was meditating twice a day on a daily basis, praying every day, and picking up all the other spiritual tools that had been laid at my feet, I, through the experience of just doing what would keep me connected to that power, came to understand it better. And what you said reminds me so much of like that experience that I had, and how like just being in the experience of nature is going to give you more of an understanding of that power.
That's always been true for me. And it's also a confronting space, you know, and people are just without distraction. It's like, also like for anyone that's listening, know that comfort and confrontation are two sides of the coin. You know, like you got to go through that confrontational space. You got to go through that bored, provocative space to hit that. And so people feel the confrontation with nature too, when you're just with the wild and you're with something that doesn't want you to perform, and you're with something that doesn't want your mask. And so know that comfort, usually the way through it is some form of confrontation, like a great hero's journey, as they'd say.
And so the last thing I want to, talk to you about when it comes to nature is something I've been thinking so much, and I'm just interested is in my eyes, you're such a great mind. Like I was at your living and somebody said like, I trust your hit. Like with you, like I trust your hit. I have, a connection to my own inner guidance system, and I've been led to trust your hit. And so I'm just wondering, something that came up for me, the insight I've been getting too, is like how important it is for us right now to like have gardens. Because you look at a time like this and you see like how many people are struggling to even get the food that they need to fill their pantries. And it's like how awesome it would be if this too could like maybe encourage more of us to be gardening and like growing our own food.
Man, it's everything. I had a large garden for a while when I lived in a place called Nelson, British Columbia, and I didn't know what I was doing. I was just such a hack. And then I moved to New York City and just took up an extraordinary amount of houseplants, and keeping plants close, even in a city process, even if you can't have a garden, I think is so important to stay close to just like the intelligence of plant life. And people feel that way with pets too, the intelligence of wildlife, even though we've domesticated them. But I think to, our earlier points of like, pay close attention to the things that are rising inside of you that look like a want or a need or a desire, because that's something good inside of you that was time capsuled, like that seed in that pod that waits for the fire to come, that only sprouts in the moment of a crisis or a change. It's like, why all of a sudden do I want to garden? Why all of a sudden do I want to reach out to that person? Why all of a sudden do I want to leave this job and go that way? And we want to see, like, in unprecedented times, be in a not knowing mind, so that, like, I'm diverting from your question. I'll come back to it, but that not knowing mind will say, like, something wants to come forward in me. And when I'm not always being who I have to be, and I'm starting to see what wants to come through me, for you, it might be garden. And I couldn't think of anything more appropriate for all of us than to start to really pay attention to the work that's being done in soil and the regeneration of soil for the carbon drawdown, and the amazing work that's being done in biochar and all the variant things that we have to come back to our foundation again and start to build from the ground up this crazy industrial system that does not respect animals or plants or earth or soil and it's insane what we've done and called that life. And so if in small little grassroots ways, we can go back to what's life sustaining, a garden, what's growing our own food, what's taking better care of animals in the industrial system, and have this be like a moment that is not in vain. I really want this to not be a moment in vain, because it's too big of a moment. The whole world is having a big moment.
Yeah, I think, there's so much that you've offered us today, but the biggest thing that I got out of this conversation as far as not just doing in a time like this what we've always done, and taking this as an opportunity, or using this as an opportunity to become somebody different. And so, before we head out, I want to, again, I know I asked you these the first time, but it's like when I teach meditation, I tell people when they come back for a refresher course, like, if you come back 6 months later after you've been meditating every day, you're going to hear the information totally differently because you'll have that much more experience in the field. And so, I want to, based upon all your this much life experience since I last talked to you, ask you these questions again. And, I'm assuming too, the answers will, because of everything that's going on, probably be pretty relevant, to what's going on in our world right now. But the first one is what does community mean to you? And maybe what does community mean to you in a time like this?
Community in a time like this, very overused and often misunderstood word is like a community to me is whatever is the infrastructure of not only people, but places and nature and resources and teachings that I go to that allow for my most intimacy, my most vulnerability, and my most support, so that I can be the one that both knows and not knows, that gives and receives, that helps and is helped without a feeling of transaction or obligation or, debt, indebtedness. And so I think for me, a community, I have so many far stretching friends all over the world and these online places that are beautiful spaces. But to me, it's getting tighter and more intimate of family and close circle that really are called upon on times like this, that we check in, we say, you safe and sane, you safe and sane, someone's looking out for you, someone's got you, what do you need? And that little tended to structure can become these bigger networks of help and support for people that really need it right now.
Thank you. Yeah, I like too how you mentioned that often misunderstood and overused word. For me, I use that word because when I started this podcast, I realized that the things that kept me sober, which for me was a community, a set of tools like meditation and being of service, were the same things that not only could keep me sober, but could help me thrive in my life. And so these three final questions are really getting other people's perspective on the role that these three things, service, tools like meditation, and community, can play.
And when I hear you say that, the last thing I think I would say about community too is it's people that we also are accountable to, where I don't get to just do whatever I want, and what keeps you sober is a place where like part of you won't lose your sobriety because of who it would affect. And I think that's an important part of community, of who we're obliged to take care of. And so it keeps us in alignment.
Thank you. So my next question is what do you think is the most important tool to create a shift in your life, in the life of others? And so too, we could relate that to what's going on right now. Like, what do you think is the most important tool we have right now to create that shift?
The ability to be willing and open enough in a moment to ask what it's requiring of me. And so knowing that everything is changing fast, and I don't know about you, but in the morning I have way different information than the evening, and things are moving so quickly, especially in New York at our home right now. And that ability to just keep present enough and responsive enough and non-reactive enough to say, what's this moment asking? What's this moment asking? Does it need more gratitude, more love, more service, more donation, more rest? And just keep asking, and then being a good enough student to the inner voice that I respond.
Now, can I ask you another question about that? Because when you teach, I feel like I've heard you say, and correct me if I'm wrong, like often you'll ask before you teach what it is that's supposed to come through. Mm-hmm. And I just think that's like so brilliant, like, especially because it's like in a world where we're taught, like, you have to have like your whole class like planned, and, like how important the structure of that is. And I've noticed that too. And I think I started second guessing myself sometimes when I would teach asana, not like there'd be sometimes like something would just come through me and I wouldn't need a plan. But, and then I would talk to people who were like you got to have a plan before you teach. But then I have to, again, go back to like reference what's right for me through source before another.
Yeah. And I think a plan is so important plans are important,
of course.
But I think what I really value is the ability to listen. When somebody's talking, I'm not planning what I'm going to say next. I'm just listening, and then I'm listening, and I'm really trying to become a good listener in that, where I'm not talking over, I'm not interrupting, and think of that like, metaphorically on a big stage too. It's just trying to listen again. Like, what's this moment want? What's this class want? What's this room want? What's my addiction want? What's my panic want? What's it trying to say? Everything's trying to say something. It just needs somebody to hear it.
So my last question is what is your favorite way to serve? And, that could also be your favorite way to serve in a time where things like they are now are so uncertain.
My favorite way to serve is when somebody has really asked me for what they need. That way, it's not really any one way. Sometimes it's like a great cute laugh, and sometimes it's a dance, and sometimes it's a teaching, and sometimes it's money. And but when a friend can come to me and say, I really need you to listen, or I really need $1,000, whatever is like their need, if I can do it, that's my favorite way. I want to give in a way that people need, not in the way that I just want to give.
Yeah, I feel that way too. It feels so good when somebody can say, this is what I need, and life affords me in that moment the opportunity to serve them.
Totally. I love that.
And that's how I felt with you. I was like talking to you, and like, it was just what I needed was to have you on my podcast today. So
I hope so.
Thank you enough for your time. I just think like it's so important, like for people like yourself and myself to be sharing anything that we can right now to offer value in any way that it can to anybody who's listening.
I love it. And it's always my favorite conversation. I love talking with you. And what I'd implore anybody that's listening is, if you have excess time or energy, like think of a good enough way to solve and whatever problem needs your attention. And then, see if you can curb some distraction that way. I know there's a lot of people in really difficult home situations, and children in really stuck home situations that could use some innovation or ingenuity of how to reach out to them and how to get them help. And there's so many things we could spend our time doing right now that don't involve us, exposing anybody or being a vector or being in the healthcare industry. So I think just get really creative right now if you have excess and time to share and heart to spare.
And the other thing too, I don't want to forget to mention is Upwards. I think that's a great resource right now. If you want to speak to that for a minute, because it's been a great resource for me. I actually have one of my best friends right now at my house who just did breakup and, had a transformative experience doing that. And so I'd love for you to just speak to that, because that's another resource.
Yeah. So that's a resource. It's a library of resources, and there's a free component of it. If you go to upwards.gold/moregold, on that are so many free YouTubes and talks and teachings.
Free, even when you have
that part's totally free. That is just hundreds of resources of the things that have saved my life. And then if you go to George's link, that'll be linked up on this podcast, and go through his site there. If you have, any trouble of how to really structure this time to punctuate it and make it rich and nourishing, then Upwards, they're a series of 4 40-day programs that come to your email every morning. And they help do things like stabilize your mind and build focus and build discipline and create a dream for going forward and heal your heart and clean up your inner dialogue if you've got a wicked inner critic. And on upwards.gold/about, through George's link, you can see which one would help you stabilize your mind or help your heart or build your discipline or build your faith at a time when we really could use some faith and prayer. So those ones you can link through to George. And then the free is more-gold. On Instagram, it's upwards.gold. And we just try to put as many talks and podcasts and teachings and,
There's so much
talking
gold
about
there.
compassion, and it's all the stuff that when I've been broken, lost, and scared, it's been a light in a dark place.
Yeah.
So it's very personal.
It's all the things too, I think, that we need right now. And if you hop on this opportunity, you're going to have at least 40 days. And if you do all 40 days of structure in a time where it's more needed than ever, and if you do all 4, that's 160 days worth of resources to help you feel like you have more routine and things are more stable amongst a time where things can feel so uncertain.
I couldn't have said it better.
Thank you so much.
I love you, George. I thank you so much. And I can't wait to talk again.